welcome everybody to the Beech room. What a lovely green background we have here today, and to the NTECLA strand of OTLA 8. See, it is OTLA 8. That's why we didn't call it OTLA 8, because it's a mouthful, isn't it? OTLA 8. There you go. Which is the NTECLA strand. There are other ESOL projects, but these are specifically ones chosen by the NTECLA teams, which is absolutely fantastic. And I'm going to let the mentors do their introductions to their teams. But before we start, just introduce myself. My name is Rachel Owner. I'm the research group lead and working for CCC, and also NTECLA co-chair. And on behalf of NTECLA, because not many of NTECLA people could come today, we just wanted to pass on our huge thanks to all of the teams and to the Claire Collins team for supporting NTECLA with this, and we've thoroughly enjoyed it. And while I'm on thanks, I want to thank my three amazing and talented mentors who have been really wonderful on this project. For me, it's round of applause, everybody. It's been an absolute pleasure for me to work with this wonderful bunch of practitioners, as it has been the also fantastic and dedicated 8 teams that we've had working on this strand. And I'm so super excited to hear all about your projects today. I really can't wait. I've had a little sneaky preview of some of those, and they are absolutely fantastic, and I can't wait. We had a little bit of feedback, just very briefly. We had a brief bit of feedback, didn't we, there at the beginning, about the ETF, their praise for all of the reports this year. And they've certainly said that they've been incredibly high standard and extremely interesting. So thank you to the ETF for that feedback. And I'm not going to babble any longer, and I'm just going to pass over to Cathy, because we're going to hear your group of projects first. So take it away, Cathy. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rachel. I'm just going to keep mine really short. I also just want to start with the thanks, because it's been a real pleasure to work with my 3 project teams this year. And I just want to hand over straight to them, because they've got so much to say about the things that they've been doing this year. So we've got projects from New College Durham, from Buckinghamshire College, and from SAVTE. And so we're starting with Sarah and Bridget from New College.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Bridget, and I work with Sarah at New College. So just to tell you a little bit about our project, we, like probably many of you, we have a perennial problem with ESOL students who rise up through entry 1, entry 2, entry 3, and then they kind of get stuck on their writing. And it's having a real impact on how they can progress onto level 1 or onto other courses, that aren't ESOL. So that's why we decided to look at particularly the writing element of entry 3. What could we do to support students and help them to progress? Because it wasn't just their English that was suffering, we felt it was having an impact on their lives. More generally, it was stopping them progressing. So what we did, Sarah and I both taught on different classes. So we kind of split the workload. So Sarah looked at some approaches and I looked at different approaches, and then we would look together what worked best and why, and adapt our approaches. What we had in common was we worked with the Functional Skills English team across the college. So we picked their brains to see what approaches they already use, what could we adapt. We were hoping that we would be able to use some of the work that our students produced in their classes, that they would then be able to get feedback from. That was the original idea. However, sadly, due to internal politics, that didn't happen. But we got lots of ideas from them. And we also, similarly, we also both had in-class mentors. So Sarah had a functional skills learner. So she was an adult learner, native speaker, and she was working towards her level 2 functional skills. So she worked with our ESOL students. And in the class I worked with, we had a 6th form student who actually ultimately wants to go into teaching, and she would be a really good teacher. So that worked really well, because the students had a little bit more one-to-one support. So the sort of approaches we tried, it was a whole range of different things. So from colour-coded feedback to reflection, to genre analysis. But really what we both had in common was focusing on the writing. Sarah's class focused more on the planning, so how to make sure that they were well prepared before they started the task. And my class focused more on a genre analysis approach, and we used Writing Works, which I'm sure all of you are aware of. It's just the most wonderful book. So it was interesting. We tried different things. We got feedback from students, what they liked, what they didn't like, and we just adapted things. And what we found, we'll go on to well, we'll see in more detail later, because it was quite interesting what we found. The overall, better overall writing skills, which is what we were aiming for. I'm not going to say it made the most enormous difference, because we only had a year. Because I think one of the things we found was there aren't any quick fixes. So when you have students, I'm sure you have similar situations where students have been learning ESOL for a long, long time. You're not going to be able to move them that quickly onto being fantastic writers, but you can start them along the process. And that's what we found. We also thought we needed to temper our own expectations, because I think at the beginning we were, excited and, oh yes, everything we do is going to lead to them being better writers. But actually, students are individuals, and some things worked for some and some things didn't work for others. So we needed to kind of rein in our own expectations. We also found that although we were focusing on writing, it's actually really, really hard just to teach one skill in isolation. And so the overall language improved of all the students that we were working with. And we also found that working with other teams really helps, because everybody has different ideas, different approaches, and from learning from other colleagues who maybe don't work in your department, it's opening a whole new range of skills for you. We did have some issues, ongoing issues with COVID. Unfortunately, that really impacted. We had a particularly difficult time after Christmas, where 50% of my team were off. So it meant an awful lot of sort of covering classes, which then impacted on the time I was able to spend on the research. But hopefully going into next year, that's not going to be quite such an issue. Fingers crossed. Cathy, next slide, please. So I've got a little case study here. The class that I worked with was a literacy class. So what we did, Sarah worked with a level 1 traditional ESOL class. So the sort of students who have very spiky profiles, they can communicate very well, but they have issues with writing. And the class I worked with was much smaller. We called it ESOL literacy, because these are people generally who've come from countries where they've been exposed to English all their lives, so their speaking and listening is fantastic, but for various reasons they're really struggling with literacy. So this is a student who was typical of that class. His name was Ibrahima. So he's originally from Gambia. So he's had a lot of exposure to English in his life. He then moved to Spain, so he speaks Spanish very well. His native language is Manjaco, which is not written. So all 3 languages that he speaks, he has a common problem, that he really finds it hard to write. So I've got a little clip of what he says. And Cathy, if this is possible, would you be able to move it on to 2 minutes and 8 seconds? Sorry to put that pressure on you.
I will do my best.
Right, so can you tell...
Sorry, give me the time again.
Right, so
and 8
can
seconds.
you tell me first...
2 minutes.
And 8. Perfect.
Oh, I went off it.
That's fine. You can start there, it's perfect.
Well, when I first came to the UK, writing was my problem. I cannot write, like, I always, in my mind, like, I can have ideas, but when it came to writing, I always struggle to put words together.
Mm-hmm.
But now I think I am quite doing better, because from where I start and
Mm-hmm.
now I can see changes. a big changes. to be
Yeah.
honest, yeah.
Well, I can certainly see a massive change.
Yeah.
What do you think has helped you this year?
Well, firstly, because we this year we are mostly focused on writing, so and that's what we always keep on doing, like doing our homeworks and spelling. Sometimes in my writing I always struggle with spelling, so my teacher helped me a lot, so there, and yeah, it is improving now.
Okay. And do you think that obviously you said we do a lot of writing in class, which we do. Do you think your general English has improved as well?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, because I remember when I came to the UK first time, and when I went to the shop, like when I speak to people, they won't understand me. I sometimes feel sad, like even to go to the shop, like it is always a problem. Like I'm like to myself, if I go to the shop, when I speak to them, they won't understand, so I feel bad. But now I think I can go anywhere in the UK, anywhere, any shop, and speak, they will understand me. And so I think that's a big difference for me, and I'm happy with that.
So you feel a lot more confident.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Is there anything you've particularly enjoyed this year?
Yeah, I have enjoyed like coming to the college, like meeting new people, and always keep on improving my English. So I'm very happy in this
Do you
college.
think it's been better this year because the class is very small? Has that made a difference, or does that not make any difference at all?
Well, to be honest, I can't tell, because for me, I am used to big classes. So
Well, I know at the beginning of the year you were quite disappointed, weren't you, that the
Yeah.
class was so small?
yeah, I always like.
Thank you. So I think what's important from listening to Ibrahima is you get that sense of it's not just his writing that's improved, it's his confidence. He talks about being able to go into a shop and communicate with people, whereas before he found that really difficult, and he said himself he felt really sad. Can we go to the next slide, please, Cathy? Thank you. So I've got a QR code. I've just dropped it into the chat as well. It's just a little woo clap, if you wouldn't mind. There's a little poll. So if you wouldn't mind, the link is in chat if you can't access the QR code, and I'll see if I can get the results up as you start voting. Okay, that's perfect. Thank you. So obviously I asked you what you thought was the most important, the most positive impact of this project. And what's interesting is the vast majority are agreeing with what I thought, which wasn't what I thought at the beginning. 92% of you have said increased confidence, and 8% have said better writing skills. I will, when I'm not presenting, I will take a screenshot of this and put it into chat. When we first started this project, I think as teachers, we were kind of fixated on the writing, the process of writing. We want them to improve their writing. And maybe we didn't really consider, although we knew that it was impacting their life, but maybe we didn't consider so much the positive impact that it would have on their life. But what we have found is a massive impact. And I'll just show you this, if I could share the last slide, Cathy. This is just phenomenal for me. I'm not going to say anything, I'm just going to let you read it. So for me, this just reinforces why we do what we do. I think in particular, the person I've mentioned there, that he was in employment. So he had worked for Sainsbury's for years. and his supervisors had always said to him, you know, why don't you apply for a promotion? And when he started with us, he told us this, and he said, I don't have the confidence, because I know that as a supervisor, I've got to write reports, and, you know, I've got to do some written work. And he'd written himself off. But now he applied for the job, he got the job, and he is thriving. So for me, this just says it all. This is why we teach, and this is why we do what we do. So basically that's it from me. I'd be happy to answer questions, or whether you wanted to ask questions at the end of all three of our presentations. I'll leave that up to Cathy.
Thanks, Bridget. I'm just figuring out if I can, how I unshare now in Zoom. This is a platform I'm not so familiar with. I'm assuming it's that one. No, help. How do I unshare?
You should just be able, there should be a little red thing on there just says
Stop sharing.
There
Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Bridget. We do have some time for Q&A now, specifically on Bridget's project. So if I'm happy to open up to the room, if anybody has questions, we can either do physical raise hands, or we can use the reactions button if anybody has any questions or comments.
Julie.
Thanks, Julie.
Hi, Julie.
Hello, I'm hoping my Wi-Fi doesn't drop out. Just wondering, next steps. I mean, obviously OTLA in its sense, this isn't carrying on, but we know that it's not going to just stop. So just wondering next steps. I'm interested to know how you may or may not be taking it forward.
Well, we thought that the ESOL literacy class in particular was so successful that we're running it again this year. So it is a much smaller class, so we have to have kind of bigger classes in order to support it funding wise. But we just thought the benefits we could see to the students was so important that we're gonna run that again this year. And then obviously the level 1 ESOL class will run again. But I think we'll be using the sort of approaches that Sarah used, because we could see a big improvement in the writing.
Oh, it's really good to hear. Really great.
Thanks, Julie. Tracy?
Hello. I was interested, you mentioned a book, Writing Works, and I quickly glanced at it on Amazon. Was it of great help to you? Were you able, could you mention a couple of aspects that you brought into the writing classes?
Yes, I mean, I've used this book for a long time. It's not a new book, it's a very old book, but sometimes the oldest are the best, aren't they? So it's Helen Sutherland and Maria Spiegel. So they wrote it years and years ago. So the way they structure it, so it basically follows genre analysis. So you have a model text, and then they have really, really brilliant exercises that get the learners to focus on every bit of the text. So you look at the text as a whole, you look at sentence level, you look at word level. They do some grammar in there as well. So you can, it's a unit basically for each text type. So you can adapt it, you can take bits out, you can add bits in. But and it's also multi-level. So the class that I was working with, they were multi-level. They were all very good speakers, but in terms of writing, we were ranging from E2 to level 1. So within that book, they have multi-level exercises. So I thoroughly recommend it. If you haven't used it before, it's brilliant.
Okay, can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Did you have any particular approach to learning spellings of words?
Yeah, so interesting. We did an OTLA project last year, and we did quite a lot of work on spelling. So we already had like a big long presentation about spelling strategies. So what we asked students to do, we go through with them different strategies that they can use. We asked them to choose an approach, try it out. Does it work for them? So again, it's getting them to use something and reflect. So we just gave them lots of different tools and asked them to try out different ones and what works best for them. So within one class, we had different students using different approaches. We did quite often do little spelling tests, just so that we knew that they were kind of, looking at spellings at home, because I think that's the only way to check whether the approach is working. Are they actually using it? Because they could easily say, oh yes, I tried this one, but it doesn't work. But unless you're evidencing the fact that they are actually doing it, you don't really know. So I think the thing that we found, Tracy, is just to try lots of different things, not be prescriptive, and just encourage students to try lots of different things and be honest with themselves about what works and what doesn't work. So I think the majority of ours liked sort of chunking, so chopping words up into little syllables. That seems to be a really popular approach.
Oh, lovely, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Sorry, Emily, I realise you have a question, but I'm really conscious of time. Can we go on to the next one, and maybe if we've got some questions at the end for the whole 3 projects? Sorry, thank you, Bridget. That was really good. I particularly I thought the really powerful words from the students, isn't it, when you hear their own voices saying these things. And for me, that notion of confidence and self-belief, how it's just not a measurable thing, is it? But actually, you really demonstrated that really well in your presentation. So thank you very much.
Hi, so I'm Suzanne, I'm from Buckinghamshire College Group, and our project was really on taking sort of the key aspects of ESOL delivery, so the key sort of teaching principles, and then seeing if we could apply them to GCSE and functional skills delivery and see if that will make an impact into you know, our delivery and moving it forward. So next slide. Next slide, Cathy. Thank you. So our project was really a whole college approach. We wanted to collaborate. That was the key thing when we put in our bid. We wanted to really share expertise across ESOL, GCSE and functional skills. And we wanted to use the expertise in ESOL to sort of develop the teaching in functional skills. And it kind of changed in terms of what we thought we were going to do in the bid into the actual project, where we just wanted to really look at making lessons more active, and more sort of student focused rather than sort of teacher focused. Our project had a real layered approach in terms of who was the student. We obviously had ESOL teachers as students, we had functional skills, GCSE, we also had the students themselves, and then I was an unexpected learner in the project also. The model that we really focused the project around was around an in-house training course. So the whole project was really centred around a bit like a SAVTE-esque course that would sort of develop the understanding of the key TLA principles within ESOL delivery, and then our functional skills and GCSEs, or the students within the project, would develop the learning through sort of a plan, act and observe and reflect model, and sort of apply and develop their practice. And reflection was really a key part of the project. We'd really identified, or sort of as a manager, I'd sort of identified what we needed to develop. I sort of had a clear idea of how we were going to do it through the in-house training, and really sort of had in my head what I expected the impact to be as a result. But the nature of action research, it wasn't this straightforward, and actually what I'll come on to is that was the key learning really, and the most valuable part of it. We learned much more than I expected that we expected, more from what didn't work in some ways, or wasn't the expected outcome, as much as what did really. Next slide. So I've gone for picture metaphors. So what did we learn? The first picture really sort of at the top there, collaboration was key, and we really wanted sort of collaboration to sort of come out, and that was our key learning really. You know, sharing across ESOL, functional skills, GCSE, staff really valued and teachers really valued that allocated time, you know, to really develop their practice, reflect, explore, unpick. We'd always planned to do the in-house training session. That was something that we were always going to do. But the project really kept us on track and made it happen. And I think with some of the key priorities, Ofsted and various other things, it would have slipped, but the project kept us going. And actually the project develops so much learning where you're collaborating with peers, with other practitioners, as a team, sort of inside the college, outside the college. It really impacted so positively all the way through. The language lesson at the start of the in-house training course was incredibly successful. It put the students, the teachers, actually as students. So they learned Korean, did a 10-minute Korean lesson, and they really valued being the learner. They'd forgotten what it's like to be a learner in a classroom, and it was some real light bulb moments for them. They were able to kind of reflect on their own practice, think about things that they needed to develop, or key kind of basic concepts that they'd forgotten. It also worked really well because it was a face-to-face session, and I think for me it really made me realise and reinforce how valuable face-to-face sessions are. Zoom is great and we do so much on that, but actually being in a classroom for a whole day in a development session, sharing and collaborating was really good. And out of that session was so many ideas about pre-teaching vocabulary for GCSE text, repetition, images, using first language with functional skills students, with English as a second or third language, and staff were really buzzing from that sort of session. Obviously my cake is our layered approach to our project. Obviously there were quite a few sort of learners within the project, so ESOL teachers were kind of our unexpected learners really, in the fact that one of the teachers that delivered most of our sessions would have said at the beginning of it that actually she prides herself on a mixture of delivery models, so TTT, discovery led, but actually when she was delivering to us she realized that she'd become a bit teacher led, so it enabled her to sort of reflect and move her delivery back to more discovery led TTT kind of approach. As a sort of team collaborating when we were putting the training course together, we actually had 9 concepts to begin with, of principles that we wanted to cover, and with collaboration and discussion we actually condensed that down to 5, so that was another bit of learning for us together. The teacher that actually delivered the Korean lesson has an ESOL background, but is actually my functional skills GCSE teacher, or one of them. She actually really developed her practice as a result of teaching the teachers Korean. It made her think about pre-teaching vocabulary again and the value of that, using images and definitions of words within her delivery much more. Students were much more engaged. She moved them from starters to middle of the lessons and back again. And she said that students really valued the competitive aspect. They were much more engaged as a result. So that really improved her delivery going forward. In terms of the GCSE and functional skills teachers, it was sort of a game of 2 halves, really. For some, it was a constant, excitable learning curve of light bulb moments and sort of exploring and developing, and they would really embrace the whole thing and were like sponges, reflecting, applying and moving forward. For others, it was a longer journey of self-reflection and identifying barriers and evaluating actually their beliefs and values that actually we realised were actually preventing them from changing their delivery from being teacher-led to student-focused. And it sort of started them to realise how that they would need to move on. The students themselves, they developed their own learning and that independence. They made connections and links through discovery-led learning, particularly within sort of functional skills and GCSE. And in functional skills, they used first language for a particular group of Romanian students. And one student really benefited from this. And when he sat his writing exam, he actually surpassed his peers, where he'd made so much so much progress and development with his writing. So as a manager, I ended up being the unexpected lead of the project. It wasn't planned, but due to sort of circumstances, I ended up taking on the role. And I was really worried. I kept saying to Cathy, it's going to hinder it. You know, teachers may not engage as much, and you know, I was just really worried about it. But it actually had such a positive impact, and a reverse to what I thought it would be. It was a different role for me. I became a learner. I became a researcher, I became a collaborator, and I had to look at things differently. I think I became Elsa, and I had to let it go and kind of go with the flow of action research. I think what it meant was the fact that the staff could see me in a different role, which I think was useful. It also enabled me to identify sort of key barriers for individual teachers, and then support them to move forward with next steps. So my mask, my next kind of sort of picture really, the training gave us a safe space for teachers to collaborate, learn from each other. It was dedicated time, and the kind of image in the middle really of that self-reflection, we really encouraged them to be really honest in their reflections. And one of the interim dissemination project sort of events made me think about reflections and let them all do it in their own ways rather than being quite prescriptive. We all had the same sort of questions, but they all did it in different formats, which meant I got really honest reflections back from them. It was also useful for teachers to see me wearing a different hat, or a different, you know, lifting the mask of a manager and just being a collaborator and a learner. They saw that I valued their expertise, that I really wanted them to develop their craft and sort of change, and that I did have students at the centre. I think sometimes they think I don't, but I do. And they were incredibly honest. I was incredibly honest, and we were all comfortable to lift the mask, say what we thought, rather than them sort of saying what they think I wanted to hear. And what came out of all of that was that for some of the staff with sort of the slow burn, it was about their internal battle of what was preventing them from moving forward. That they felt constrained by the GCSE syllabus. They felt that they had to teach to the exam. And they couldn't really see how can I be creative with all of that. And some of them had some preconceived ideas of actually, I've got to teach, I've got to tell, I've got to teach. So actually it was invaluable learning for me. And I got to the heart of the problem, which then enabled me to then think about how we could move forward with it. And actually, in a one-to-one recently, one of the teachers that was more of a slow burn, she sort of said to me, these sessions have been really valuable because I realise that I have got to change my practice. I do have quite concrete values and beliefs of how teaching should be, but I know that I've got to kind of move forward with it. And I'm beginning to unpick that and kind of think about more sort of student-led delivery, and that's still teaching. So that was incredibly powerful for me in terms of my learning. And then the final one really is about the lightning bolts, really. The project enabled so much collaboration across the college group where I was sharing what was going on. It enabled me to identify the underlying reasons why practice may not be changing within my area. It enabled next steps in terms of a lesson study model. Where we've already started this, where we implemented this and we revisited aspects of the course, but very much linking to writing of the schemes of work, reflecting, and sort of collaborating together and thinking about how we could change things. It's also developed further collaboration and reflecting, and we've now changed the name to a learning study model rather than a lesson study model. And we've also implemented this across the college group, linking it to lesson observation feedback, so that we we're kind of using this model going forward. Within my own lesson observations, where I've been doing those across the group, I've been able to share discovery-led learning, and that's been used within T-level delivery, particularly by educational practitioners. Collaborating as managers with CPD, we're looking at next year giving dedicated time for collaboration and exploration through projects. And one particularly is around sort of integration of English and maths and trading of skills and expertise across the college, but looking at sort of teach the team style events where we're looking at sharing our disciplines across the group, where each team takes it in turn to sort of give a little micro teach to each other. So the lightning bolt is just this one project has sparked so many ideas and thoughts. Next slide, Cathy. So I have a quick Padlet, and all I want you to do is which picture from our from my learning or our learning from our project resonates with you the most, and why?
So maybe we can open it up to questions then while people are kind of thinking about contributing to the Padlet. That's a really great question to ask, so, Suzanne, in terms of which of the metaphors you've talked about maybe resonates most. We have a question in the chat from Esther, so it's really interesting. It's often hard to unpick whether ESOL teaching techniques are special or simply just good teaching, and does it matter? Do you want to come in on that, Suzanne?
I don't think they're special. I think it is just good teaching, but I think it's just having that confidence to sort of share a different way of doing things. And I think it was that idea of sometimes people have a preconceived idea of how things should be taught, where actually I think it's all about sort of creativity and ensuring that the learners develop those links. And I think particularly with functional skills and GCSE, they come with so much teaching and learning, and actually student-led delivery allows them to unpick it all rather than put more of what a teacher has said into their head, which they've probably already got. So I think that for me, the collaboration was just the kind of the collaborating and sharing of skills was the most important thing, and embracing maybe let's do it differently rather than let's just do it the same.
Brilliant. Thanks, Suzanne. Is there any other questions for Suzanne?
I was just going to ask if there's any particular kind of, I'm saying ESOL techniques, but you talked about things like pre-teaching vocabulary. Were there anything that particularly kind of caught either teachers or students' imaginations? Do you think there was any particular techniques that kind of?
I think the key one really was just moving from being very sort of PPP in terms of I'm going, deliver through presentations or PowerPoints to actually that discovery-led. I think when we were sort of first said discovery-led, some teachers were like, oh my goodness, sort of thinking, I can't see how this would work. But the sessions were quite good because it was almost, they were the students in the session learning about doing discovery-led and then thinking, okay, actually, how could I apply this? And for some, they sort of took a giant leap, and for others, they just took the little pigeon steps or baby steps of starting to put little things in. And like I said, it's a slow kind of burn for some in terms of moving, or even that sort of the TTT sort of model. So a lot of it was around models of delivery, and then sort of quite a few of my GCSE teachers are actually ex-ESOL teachers, and it was interesting how they'd left the techniques at the door, and it was sort of thinking about picking them back up and how they could be useful, really.
I'm Hannah Thornton from SAVTE in Sheffield. We're a charity based in Sheffield, and we deliver community-based ESOL. Pretty much everything that we deliver actually currently is volunteer-led. So we're not delivering large classes of ESOL. Our volunteers are trained to support individuals or small groups of learners that for some reason can't access a mainstream class. But they also facilitate conversation groups, and we have a lot of volunteer-led conversation groups throughout Sheffield, which are really supplementing their ESOL provision. So they may well be at college, they may well be with other providers, and they come along to our conversation groups as well. So there's some interesting links actually with what Suzanne's just been talking about, which is fantastic for me. Thank you, Suzanne. You've kind of set it up for me there. So ours had a similar approach in that we were looking at how we train and support our volunteers. So for the purposes of the action research, the volunteers, in a sense, were our learners. It was the volunteers that we were thinking about and focusing on and looking to see how we could introduce changes and see how that went. So it was looking at introducing a new approach to them, so participatory ESOL, which we didn't really necessarily label it as that. We talked about it on our training course, and what we were trying to do is help them to see their role in a different way. So changing and removing labels in terms of learners, teachers, or volunteer or facilitator, and trying to encourage people to see themselves as wider participants in an activity. So it was very similar in a way to what Suzanne was talking about in terms of changing people's perceptions of what was expected of them and how they what they were doing with the group and the role that they were playing with the group. So if you could take me on to the next slide, please, Cathy. So I'm going to start with what we actually found as a result of the focus of the project. And it was the first time we'd really dipped our toes into participatory ESOL and trying to encourage our volunteers to see their role in a different light, and bring in some different tools and techniques with their groups of learners. And the initial idea was that we'd need to give them some training. So we put together a toolkit and training. So we knew that that was what was going to be needed for people facilitating. So our volunteers who were facilitating conversation groups. What we actually found as the project went on and we were looking at, some of them picked it up and ran with it, and some of them, like Suzanne was saying, they perhaps dipped their toes in and tried a few bits and bobs, but it didn't necessarily progress or develop into what I was looking for in terms of participatory ESOL. I'll just keep talking, Cathy, because the slides have disappeared.
I know, sorry.
So I suppose what were we looking for is the question is, well, what would success look like? What were we hoping to see happen in these groups where we train volunteers to try things a little bit differently? So what does successful participatory ESOL look like? And for me, it's very much about thinking about taking the learning outside of the classroom, going beyond what we might consider a traditional discussion of a topic, exploring an issue, developing the language, working collaboratively on a topic that perhaps did come from the group, a bit of co-creation in terms of designing the curriculum and what topics were going to be explored, but taking it beyond that and seeing action happening as a result of exploring a topic. So you may know of an organisation called English for Action in London, and they embed participatory activities throughout their curriculum. So their learners are still working towards Skills for Life exams, but they co-design the curriculum at the start. They use participatory approaches throughout, and part of the curriculum is also action planning, taking action, taking further steps. What's going to happen as a result of this burning issue? And the groups, there were two groups actually of ours that really did manage to take it to this level. So it was really interesting to look at them and say, well, why has this worked? What are the factors? What's different about these groups that means the learners have really engaged with it, and it has developed and progressed and kind of taken on a life of its own and progressed into a much bigger experience for them, as opposed to just a piece of classroom-based learning. And so the other two elements in the mix here are a hot topic, a burning issue that is of importance, and that they come to the session and this is what they want to be talking about and exploring because it's a genuine issue that needs sorting out. And the other element, and the two are very interlinked, is about everybody there having shared experience. So that hot topic is something they can all relate to. So they have shared experience, and that might be shared lived experience of a community that they live in, a local neighbourhood, or a particular challenge that they all face in life in terms of whether it's progressing, getting into employment, childcare, whatever it might be, challenges that they're facing. But a really important aspect that we could see in the two groups where it really developed was that the participants in the room, and that includes the facilitators, have that shared experience and shared equal input into the discussions and the planning, and that they had a hot topic. So there was a clearly emerging theme that they wanted to talk about and tackle. So if you could take me on to the next slide, Cathy. This is just a little bit of an overview of the training that we did with our volunteers. So it was a training session where we introduced them using some participatory techniques to the concept. And I think they're very familiar from our standard training course around using inputs, using visuals for stimulus, analysing discussions, so exploring problems with learners in a conversation and encouraging them to analyse and use different language to work their way through a problem. But the stage where we were really trying to move people onto is supporting a group to plan action, because we've got that advantage. They are community-based groups. They can take things out of the classroom and decide what they want to do, whether that might be perhaps traditionally writing a letter to your MP, or it could be to the point of actually we're going to go down to the town hall and we're going to protest about this and we're going to prepare for it. So whatever relevant action they decided on. So action planning was a key part of this process that we were encouraging our facilitators to work through with their groups. And like I said, some of them, they just didn't take it to that level. They didn't get to that point because they kind of ground to a halt. They ran out of ideas, and there wasn't the stimulus to put ideas into practice in terms of taking action. But a couple of groups ran with it and it went really well. So I'm going to tell you the next slide, please, Cathy, is a bit about the two of the groups. So they were both in the same neighbourhood in Sheffield. And this was where the hot topic came in. This is a neighbourhood, I guess it's sort of 1960s, 70s blocks. You can see the original picture there of the sort of housing that's in the area. And it's under a current consultation with Sheffield City Council to redevelop the area. So there'd been letters and websites and things about this, but it had very much passed the learners by. They had very little awareness of what was going on. And one of our volunteers took them along to a public consultation. And this is where some of them discovered for the first time that their houses were going to be demolished or be redeveloped. So as you can imagine, it was quite impactful, and we had an immediate sort of focus and their motivation, obviously, to get involved and find out what they could do about this and where to take this next. So that then developed into an ongoing exploration with them of this situation that they found themselves in, and then planning what we could do next, what they could do next, actually, to take things further and be obviously more engaged as participants in that process. So the next slide just tells us a little bit about what actually happened. So housing was the hot topic. They had several facilitated sessions about the ongoing master plan consultation, what it meant for them, and analysing this in terms of, well, what impact is this going to have? What can we do about this? Why are the council doing this? Who's being listened to and who isn't being listened to? And one of the outcomes for this specific group was finding out about the fact that there was a tenants and residents association, which they were all actually paying for through their rent, but they weren't aware of this association. They didn't understand, well, what was it for? How could it be used? How was it relevant to them? So the facilitator for that group was able to bring that content to them and share that with them and explain to them about this service, essentially, that was there to support them. And then the action that's come on from that is that they've visited the TARA. The chair of the TARA has engaged with the group, has encouraged some of them to become members of the TARA, so they actually go along to the meetings. And it's also, that's snowballed into other activities in terms of quite a bit more political attention being made and more effort being made in terms of Sheffield City Council to reach out and engage with the groups who'd basically been missed in the online consultation. It was like a 40-page questionnaire to fill in online, which had a very low response rate. So the local councillors have visited this group, and the deputy leader of the council was due to visit, but it got postponed, as these things always do. But it's given them a voice, and it's given them, they're being listened to, and it's raised their profile, and they're feeling engaged in the process now. You know, they might still very much have their concerns about what's coming next, but they are now engaged in an ongoing way, as opposed to just having completed a survey or a bit of paper somewhere in a public meeting. So that's what's happened as a result, which obviously is really, really exciting for us. I think if you can take it on to the next slide, please, Cathy, and I'll just sort of try and pull together some of these strands. I was really interested to look at participatory ESOL as a way of, like we were saying, changing people's roles in the classroom, helping our volunteers to move away from seeing themselves as the teacher that's delivering the content, and like Suzanne was saying, that teacher talking time, and move it into a more collaborative environment. And some of our volunteers were very keen to do that and gave it a good go, and others had more success than others. And it's the participatory ESOL is an interesting area, because for me, I could see the connections with where it builds on adult learning theory. So we know from the research in adult learning theory that it's about active engagement with real life content, topics and issues that actually relate to people's lives. We're always talking about relevance, aren't we? And we're always looking for relevance in whatever we do in the classroom, but then giving more focus onto analysing and taking action in relation to those topics. And I think this is perhaps the challenge where some of our volunteers found difficult, was that you don't know what's going to happen next. So you go into a session, you've got a plan and you've got some tools, but you don't actually know what you're going to be talking about. You don't know what's going to come out from the group, and you don't know where it's going to go next. You don't actually know what target language you're going to be exploring, because you don't know what they're going to talk about. So it's quite, and some people are really energized by that and excited by it, and other people are terrified by it. So it does place quite a stress on a facilitator in terms of what they're comfortable to engage with. The other aspect that I think is really interesting in terms of learning theory is supporting adult learners who've had limited experience of formal education. And a lot of our learners are adults who've had very interrupted education or minimal formal education. So it's really interesting to look at, well, what environments do they learn best in? What experiences do they need to have actually to be embedding and developing their language skills? And perhaps the traditional classroom isn't necessarily the right environment for them. And that's something I'd love to look at in more depth, actually. But it's you know, the connections have only just come for me as part of this research process. But I think that's definitely something that more research could be done on. I think in this country, there's quite a bit in the US and Canada. And then the next slide just brings together another two bits of the jigsaw puzzle. Thank you, Cathy. So it's thinking about the roles of the people in the room, and that actually everybody's there as a participant. Everybody brings their shared experience. And this was a key learning point for us, which actually was that the volunteers who were able to develop these sessions and take things further beyond it just being a classroom-based discussion were the ones who had the shared experience with the learners in the room. So they either lived in that local community or they were from an ESOL learning background themselves. So we've started to kind of consider these people as experts by experience. They might not be qualified ESOL teachers, well, they're not, but they have such a wealth of experience that that's the expertise that they bring to the room. So that was a key element for us, and that's led on to a bit of an organisational learning point for us around, we have a lot of people that volunteer with us, which is wonderful. Lots of people to apply to volunteer every year, which is fantastic. But we're actually starting to change our focus a little bit in terms of who do we want to encourage into volunteering? Who do we know actually can be really, really effective and powerful when they're working with groups of learners? So we're taking a more directed approach to reaching people that we want to bring into volunteering. So that's actually about diversifying our volunteer base in every way. and encouraging people who perhaps actually normally might have faced barriers to volunteering in the past, and trying to work out how we can overcome those barriers. So we've dipped our toe in the water a bit this year and delivered a development program, so a much longer training and development with mentoring experience for people new to volunteering, particularly people with an ESOL background. And as part of that, we delivered the level 1 Ascentis. I don't know if you've seen the level 1 Ascentis award in volunteering to support English language teaching and learning, which is it was really exciting for us. We've got lots of improvement work to do on that, but it's definitely something that we will deliver again. And then I think the final bit really is thinking about the impact for the participants and the people that were involved. And obviously for those two groups, we've seen a wonderful outcome in that they're really embedded and engaged in a genuine consultation now on what happens to their homes. And they've, in a sense, their voices are being heard, and they're representing a lot of people who aren't being heard within that community. So they're really delivering quite a powerful service to other people who haven't perhaps had the opportunity to get engaged with the consultation. And in the case study that I did with Cynthia, our volunteer for that group, she made a lovely quote. I couldn't work out how to put an audio clip in, I'm afraid, but she made a lovely quote of saying, well, actually, as an individual voice, you don't get heard, but as a group of community voices, people listen. So bringing people together and having that unified voice and a plan of action and knowing where you're going to take it means you will get listened to. So it's been a really, really fantastic result for them, as well as for us as an organisation, what we've taken away from it and what we're planning to do next. I think the final slide is just my, so the final slide is just showing the 4 bits coming together, how it all pieces together for me. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a quite swift snapshot through participatory ESOL and what we've tried to do with it in the voluntary sector. Okay, so
fabulous. Thank you, Hannah. I'm hoping, do we have a question, maybe time for one question for Hannah? I'm looking on screen if anybody's got hands up. I mean, I don't particularly have a question, but I think just my comment, like Hannah and I obviously have spoke about this at length before, but for me, the thing that I think is really interesting about this notion of participatory approaches, as Hannah was saying, just this change of terminology from it being about teachers and learners or teachers and students to being around participants, that we're all equal participants in that space, that we're all equally got something to learn from each other, with each other, and contribute something. So that's something that I've really taken away from working with Hannah this year.
So Tracy had her hand up. Do you have a question, Tracy?
Yes, I was just going to say that I've had people that have been very interested in volunteering to help out in ESOL before, and I just wondered, it sounds absolutely fabulous and something that I would be interested in looking at establishing. Do you do like the full vetting process? Do you do like a DBS for any of these volunteers? Or everyone?
Yeah, so we interview people beforehand, so that's us. It's a two-way process, them understanding what they're committing to and us understanding their motivation, what are they hoping to get out of it, because people come to volunteering with very different motivations, so it's really important to understand well why do they want to get involved, and then yes, we vet them. So we do reference checks. We ask for 2 references, one that needs to be, a relatively professional reference, which in itself can be a barrier. So we have to sometimes really, really help people to try and identify who a reference would be for them, because it's an important process. We can't skip it, but for some people it is a barrier. And then the DBS check actually only comes in if they're supporting any vulnerable adults.
Okay, yeah.
We don't routinely DBS check, or if they're working in a school. If the conversation group is for adults in a school, then they do a DBS check. Yeah,
because in the past I've always been a little bit wary, because I have had learners who shouldn't have contact with like young children. So if there are mums that want to get involved, you know, and I just wondered how you navigated that, you know, but
we don't have any children in our provision, and we're very clear about that. So
not the children, but just the fact that, for example, if we were to bring volunteers in to work with other members of the community, it kind of, it throws over a reflection of, I don't know how to word it, you know, that they are also a professional almost. So it's just, you know, for my peace of mind that these people would then think that, you know, so I just wondered what you did in that vetting, that DBS, just because, you know.
On our training course, we talked through with them the boundaries of their role. We worked through different scenarios. What would you do in this situation? Obviously, we go through safeguarding content and online safeguarding as well, because, you know, we were online for a couple of years. And we also talk about their own safety. So there's a lot of preparatory content in there in terms of the safeguarding and boundaries situations, but legally we can actually only do a DBS on someone if they are going to be working with a vulnerable learner or in a regulated environment in a school.
No, I just wondered, because it was always my fear that if somebody offered to volunteer and I knew that, so although I knew they couldn't be in contact with children, for example, but in my ESOL classes there were many mums, so obviously the child wouldn't be coming to the class, but it threw over a cloak of like respectability, and I don't know how to word it, but it just, you know, but if they see this person in town, they are under the umbrella of they're a teacher as well, along with the organization, whereas, you know,
there's lots of difficulties and sensitivities, and that's why we interview and recruit, and nobody is guaranteed the opportunity to volunteer. It is a selection process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you very much, Hannah, and thank you to all of you for your presentations. That's been great.
Okay, folks, I've popped 7 minutes on the clock for you to have a chat with one another. Your rooms are about 2 or 3, and you're also going to have 60 seconds to come on back so you can finish your sentences. All right. Okay, I'm going to open rooms now, and you have a little thing that will pop up and ask you to go. See you in a bit. Have a good conversation. I think it looks like Alex is halfway in and out. That's cool. Okay. Oh, Emily's come back in. Tracy, it's not an automatic one. You've got to click the button to go into the room. It's all right. No worries. I didn't do it automatic, so I didn't know whether Emily, you wanted to stay in or out. And I know Jaya, you're popping out, aren't you, for a little bit?
I'll be back.
And Tracy still in contact. So folks, yeah, use this last minute before we go on break to add any more thoughts and any more ideas into Menti. More things might have come up since you had those conversations with your peers.
Mm.
Everyone's back now, Rachel.
Everyone's back. Thank you so much. What a lovely start to the Friday, isn't it? Honestly, brilliant presentations, all of them fantastic. I was just saying that as much as I've enjoyed this, I also feel like I want to be in every single room listening to everybody's projects, because it's just so exciting today. So yeah, we're going to go for a quick break. We've got 15 minutes, and when you come back in, we're all going into the main room. So don't forget, sorry, we've got your landing page with all of the various links. So yeah, enjoy your break, do some star jumps, run around the garden, whatever you want to do. And make a cuppa, and we'll see you back here in about.
We're in different rooms because I'm looking at ESOL and
Oh, yeah, you just said hi to me, didn't you?
See you shortly.